Okay, this is chapter 4 from the book The Medical Reformation Vegan Renaissance Bible by me, and this is going to be a chapter on diet comparisons. Okay, we're also going to end up talking a little bit about psychology. All right, so first of all, humans are herbivores. We got the 22-foot long, approximately, intestinal tract. We got the flat teeth like a herbivore. Our physiology is very much like him. It's relevant. Dr. William Roberts, the world expert on atherosclerosis, cardiac pathologist, said if you feed a high-fat diet to a herbivore, they all get atherosclerosis. And the relevance is that if you've been eating a high-fat diet when you're young, as most of us did, or ate a SAD diet or some version of a high-fat Mediterranean diet, you got atherosclerosis. And that's why I think cardiac calcium screening CT is stupid, because you already know you got atherosclerosis. What do you need to radiate yourself for, to prove it, okay? Just check your cholesterol level, get a sense of where you're at, and go from there. Let's see. Atherosclerosis blocks arteries, decreases oxygen delivery to tissue. Lack of oxygen to tissues is called hypoxia. If you have mild hypoxia of tissues, you get decreased cellular function, like you're a little stupider with your brain. But if you have decreased oxygen and glucose delivery to your muscles, you'll have less energy, okay? When you have severe hypoxia, cells will die suddenly. And sudden death of a cell is called necrosis. The cell dies, its plasma membrane lyses, it releases its inner contents into the surrounding extracellular matrix. And for example, on a CAT scan, when somebody has a stroke, sudden death of brain cells, you can point right to it. It's easy to see on a brain MRI. Versus gradual death of cells by moderate levels of hypoxia, middle levels of hypoxia, lack of oxygen, will cause the cells to die slowly, gradually, and they'll be recycled. The outer plasma membrane does not lyse. Their inner chemical constituents are put into vesicles and reabsorbed by the immune system, like in the brain, the microglia, for example. So that's what often happens, like in the brain, and so the brain just shrinks and the person gets stupider. Moderate hypoxia prevents the cell from being able to get the most function out of their mitochondria for oxygen-related metabolism of glucose to make a lot more energy. Okay, this is just a little bit of background stuff. Now I'm going to get to this chart here. This will be more interesting to you. Okay, so what I'm trying to make the point here is conventional medicine is basically very narrow. It's kind of a joke. I mean, all they know for the most part is drugs and surgery. And everyone's brainwashed to think that drugs and surgery is like the most important thing to know. And it's really important for certain things. Conventional medicine is great at acute care. Patients come into the emergency room, they can drain an abscess, they can, set a fracture so it heals better. They can do a lot of good things. Okay, and they're good at some complex high-tech stuff. Somebody's in kidney failure, put them on dialysis. They can do a kidney transplant. They can do some other pretty impressive, fancy stuff. Okay, but they're total ignoramuses on most other things related to health, what causes diseases and how to best treat them. Okay, then the next category I would talk about is high-fat vegans. Now, high-fat veganism has become real popular. It's actually much, much more popular than low-fat veganism, but in my opinion, it's bogus, okay? When people are fed high-fat diets, they get atherosclerosis. Just because it comes from a plant food doesn't mean it's not going to cause atherosclerosis and make you fat. And also, a lot of times high-fat veganism I've seen, it goes with things that, I'm interested in health. The reason why I go for the vegan diet is because it's the healthiest diet. I want people to be nice to animals, but I don't have any interest in that animal rights stuff, okay? So high-fat veganism is often a pitfall. I see people become sick from that, so don't fall for it like a chump. I gave multiple separate lectures. We'll talk more about fat later in this book, but I'm just letting you know that's still a narrow way of looking at things, and it's not healthy looking. So it comes on seeming innocent. Oh, have some more flax, have some more soy, have some, omega-3 fish oil, have some chia, have some sunflower seeds, have some almonds, have some other nuts. Pretty soon you're eating a lot of fat. Okay, have some peanut butter. All right, I don't think that's a good idea. Okay, a little canola oil, olive oil, BS. All right, we'll talk about all that stuff more later, but I think it's for chumps, all these high-fat foods. You don't need any of these things. You don't need any of these. There's enough fat and good fats and omega-3s and omega-6s and just plant foods. You don't need to go looking for it. Okay, low-fat veganism. All right, and in general, there's some really good low-fat vegans on the internet and who've written some good books. That's all great. But there's a tendency amongst the low-fat veganism community to pretend that everything is due to food. Okay, and what I'm going to say is There's a lot more to know than just food. Okay, and I think that's one of the benefits of this book and sort of my YouTube channel and internet in general. We'll talk about all these things. All these toxins are poisoning people. America is really in a bad state these days. Your water's poisoned with F minus, with aluminum. Your food is poisoned. All the subsidized stuff is poisoned. The air is poisoned with what trails up above. Okay, so your air is poisoned, your water is poisoned, and your general standardized, subsidized, processed food. It's all poisoned, okay? So you have to learn a little bit about it to avoid, getting sick. The benefits of organic, all these endocrine disrupting chemicals, okay? All the issues with excitotoxins, including caffeine. Caffeine is not a health food. Coffee and tea are not health foods, okay? That's important to know. Aspartame's a toxin. It's not a health food. And then about stress and psychology. That's relevant because your stress level elevates your cortisol and immune suppresses you. You need your immune system working well to prevent infections and to help prevent cancer. Okay, water filtration, we'll get into that. And then some stuff that's totally obscure to most doctors. They don't know anything about this. SERCA inhibitors, mitochondrial inhibitors, those are highly relevant because anything that's inhibiting the SERCA enzymes, the mitochondria enzymes, is essentially an excitotoxin. It ends up having the net same effect. That's another thing too. I'm gonna, a little bit. I'm sort of, bragging here because I want to make the point. Wow, there's a lot more useful information here than what you get elsewhere. Okay, this is not one trick pony BS. All right. If you go into the medical books, you won't see anything about mitochondrial inhibitors, SERCA inhibitors. All right. You'll almost never see anything about EMF, Wi-Fi, cell phone. That's important stuff. Oh, what I was getting at was you'll often hear in the low-fat vegan community, which I'm a member of. I'm a low-fat vegan, but I think they don't go far enough on these other issues. And you want to know about Wi-Fi. Also, what you'll often hear is what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Yes, that is true. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. However, the brain is far more complicated than is the heart. Okay, so if you really want to understand brain well, then you need to learn more about it. And I'm going to go into all these things. I'm going to go into blood flow and all this stuff too. Okay, and I can tell you, most of the people talking on the internet, they kind of like Mickey Mouse compared to this book. They don't go into any of this advanced stuff, and they'll tell you all this stupid stuff. Oh, Alzheimer's. Anybody that tells you Alzheimer's is the most common dementia, you should ignore them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're a lightweight, okay? There is a lot more to know about dementia and cognitive impairment than the BS beta amyloid nonsense, okay? We talked about that in my last lecture. Okay, we're going to get way more into complex issues in dementia. If you're interested in that, this is the best place in the world that you could be. Okay, I even know researchers who study excitotoxicity and all this stuff, and the PhDs, they tend to be like a horse with tunnel vision blinders on it. They can't put it all together. That's one of the things that I've done. I put it all together: the nutrition, the toxins, the neurophysiology, what's going on, and what you can do to avoid it. Okay, we'll talk about psychology, how to increase your intelligence, your IQ. There's a lot of things you could do. All right, I add religion in there just because religious people are way healthier, so you should know something about it. And I think this art, music, all that stuff, when it's good, positive art and music, it lowers your stress level, and that makes you more resilient and healthier. And I've seen that too. Atheists tend to be very low in resilience. Oh, my life sucks. They commit suicide or do something stupid, become drug addicts. Versus a religious person says, yeah, things are bad right now, but I expect they'll probably get better. And, I need to continue with my mission in life to do good things, whatever that might be, run the race. Okay, sunshine and exercise, of course. We'll talk about the details of that. Nitric oxide, the peroxynitrite pathway, all that stuff. So I'm saying I'm going to all this stuff. It's way beyond what you're typically going to hear elsewhere. Okay. I just let you know that because people say stupid stuff to me. I know they mean well. They'll say, well, why don't you, partner with some high-fat vegan? I was like, because I'm not even in that school, okay? High-fat veganism, that's like telling me, I'm like, let's say, natural artist, like the Renaissance artist or like the romantic realist or something like that. And that'd be like telling me, go do French impressionism or modern art or something. And I would say, bullshit, that's not my field. That's not my thing, okay? I think I leaned forward too much. My camera's gone out of focus a little bit, but who cares? All right, diet comparison chart. So the American diet, the SAD diet, standard American diet, very high in saturated fat. It has a moderate amount of oil, moderately high in sodium, and it's a disaster for health. Causes tons of atherosclerosis, and the most common cause of death is myocardial infarction. Moderate amount of strokes, and guys often are impotent before they'll have symptoms of heart disease, okay, and very high incidence of cancer. So it's for chumps. All right. The next thing is, what about the East Asian diet, the Japanese, Korean, Chinese diet? That was largely a rice diet. And let's just talk about, let's say, Japan in the 1960s. Okay, so they were relatively healthy and they lived long lives because the rice has only got 1% of calories from fat, only about 7 or 8% of calories from protein, and they ate a lot of vegetables on top of that. So even though they smoke like chimneys and they put a lot of salt on their food, as much as like 12 grams a day, they were still reasonably healthy. They had a lot of hypertension and that led to a lot of strokes, but they were reasonably healthy. Okay. Then the next population will be the South Asian Indian. In the United States, we usually refer to this population as people from India. Okay? And they are often quite skinny, but they have a lot of diabetes, a lot of coronary artery disease. And what I think is going on is because they eat too much fried food. Because a lot of them eat a lot of fried food, and the oil is really toxic to arteries. Okay, they eat some of the ghee, which is dairy, similar to butter. Okay, and nowadays they're having more processed food and stuff as well. Okay, so the point of this chart, though, is take a look at the low-fat, low-sodium vegan. They're low in sat fat. They don't eat any oil at all. This is no oil, whole food, plant-based diet. Low in sodium. They don't smoke at all. If they got a brain in their head, they eat a lot of fruits and vegetables as well. They don't get type 2 diabetes. If they've eaten this way long term, they probably don't have any hypertension. They don't get coronary artery disease. They're not going to get heart attack. Very low risk of stroke. Very low risk of impotence, cancer. So, why wouldn't you want to do that? And that's what I mean by, the typical stupid person says, oh, you're going to take away my ice cream. Oh, I can't give up eating meat. I'd rather die instead of eating. It's like, fine, go ahead. You'll have plenty of company with all the other stupid chumps. But if you want to optimize your health, this is an obvious way to do it. Like I said, I've been a doctor 30 years, studying this stuff backwards and forwards. And this is the best thing I can find. It's the most powerful thing. And why? Because I think it's our species-specific diet, I could really care less what it was. If eating meat was the thing to do, I would eat meat. But it's not. It turns out that this is the way to go. I had no affection for this vegan diet stuff. If you'd have asked me, many years ago, back when I was a college wrestler, 40 years ago, I would have thought vegan diet, that's like some Grateful Dead tie-dye t-shirt, hippie, bearded, pot-smoking, wimpy scumbag wearing sandals. Get the hell out of here. I would have had no interest, zero contempt for it. Okay, so I'm just letting you know I don't come to this naturally. I come to this because I've seen a lot of atherosclerotic disasters in the brain and the heart, and it kind of ruined my father's old age. And I saw my mother get cancer, and then I learned that I maybe could have prevented it if I'd have known all this stuff. That's a big deal to me. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I have a parody of The Ghost of Christmas Future from Christmas Carol, the greatest novel ever written by Charles Dickens. Beware of the high-fat phonies who recommend olive oil, canola oil, omega-3 oil, nuts, flax, chia, sunflower seeds, soy, as well as coffee, tea, MSG, all this crap. Okay, because they're popular. Look, hardly anybody knows I exist. I'll get, 300 views for this video. Somebody promoting all this crap will have 1 million views, all right? Okay, and then, we talked about that before. Why are 1 billion out of 1 billion rice eaters so skinny? Because only 1% of calories from fat. And McDougall puts it pretty clear. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. It's so easy to absorb fat. It just comes right in complete. Okay. All right, now here's just a sort of picture of the jackpot. Basically, with the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, you live longer. Your odds are that you will probably live longer. You'll be skinnier. You'll prevent diabetes. You have much better odds of doing all these things. Being skinny, keeping the Johnson working, preventing heart disease, preventing cancer, lowering your risk of cancer. So it's like the jackpot. Why wouldn't you want it? I can tell you, I'm triple boarded. I did my imaging guided surgery at Harvard. I've been studying stuff back and forth. This is the most powerful thing in all of health knowledge. This is the most powerful thing. This low-fat, low-sodium, and I would also call it low-protein, whole food, 100% vegan, 100% organic diet with no oil, no alcohol, no MJ, none of that BS. So it's worth knowing about. Everybody should be fascinated by this. I mean, this is where you get the highest return on time spent studying, okay? And I can also tell you, I've learned, and I've been at these places. I've been at these places like Stanford. I've had friends at some of the other Ivy places. And I did some of my training at Harvard. So I can tell you, the Ivy League for healthcare is really just kind of a joke, okay? They're not really much different than universities elsewhere. A little bit higher board scores for the kids going to the Ivy League schools for residency and fellowship. But they do the same stuff. They treat with drug-based medicine. And what I'm telling you is the knowledge in this book is far more powerful than anything that they have to offer for chronic disease in general. Okay, you go low fat, low sodium, vegan diet. You got all these people, then bumfuck, illiterate, blue zones, National Geographic, damn Buettner stuff all over the world. A lot of them can't even read probably. Okay, and they're healthier than the patients of these Ivy League doctors. Pushing drugs. Okay. I also thought of something too, is like, why is it that I can just in my part-time, while I'm working full-time, just as a hobby, why can I write the best medical book ever written? And the reason is I want to make it the best book, and I want to learn whatever's out there to help the patient. And I'll tell you, why could an Ivy League doctor never write a book like this? Because if they want to keep their Ivy League job, they can't be contradicting what Big Pharma wants. Big Pharma can just give money to the Ivy League hospital and fire any professor over there if they piss them off, okay? Let's see. The information in this book is more advanced than all their stuff. And that's what I'm also saying. Any health coach, somebody with no formal training in health, just decides they want to learn on their own. They can learn more in a week how to prevent coronary artery disease. Just read Esselstyn's diet. Read the Richard Moore stuff and what I show you here to minimize risk of hypertension and Kempner and stuff. Read the same thing about preventing leaky gut. What I'm trying to say is anyone who wants to learn, no previous medical training, just curiosity, desire to learn, willingness to put the time in to learn it, can get better results than Ivy League doctors without the vegan diet. So that's funny, because a university professional, and Goethe had said something similar about this. Goethe had said that the weakness of the professional man is that he always must include everything. He has to be comprehensive. They emphasize quantity over quality, and that's why they suck. That's why because I talk to college students, and their biology classes suck. They always give them this long list, memorize this, and this, and they don't really explain it or give them the concept. So the kids come out of there, forget everything after the test, and it's kind of a big joke. All right, the university professional must conform. You ever heard a university professor talking about women? What a joke. Okay, kind of like psychologists. They can't even say that they know the difference between a man and a woman. Okay, a man has a Johnson, a woman has a Virginia. Okay, it's pretty obvious to any common sense person. But to a professor, oh, we can't say that. Okay. All right. So anyways, that's why their books suck. They have to play along with, big drugs running the world, all right? And that's not what real health's about. Okay? Typical Ivy League doctor, like I said, don't know anything about nutrition. They recommend the Mediterranean diet. It's a typical nonsense. You'll hear it at all these meetings. You'll hear it coming out of Ivy League doctors. Even the poor CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy patients, like these poor football players with head trauma, cognitive impairment, they recommend the Mediterranean diet for them. How stupid. A high-fat diet which plugs up arteries, causes hypertension, which almost forbids practically nothing, okay? It's retarded, okay? And a lot of them recommend fish. How stupid do you have to be to recommend fish? It's like, look at salmon, 50% fat, 50% protein, no carbohydrate in meat except for animal foods except for milk. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is tons of fat, tons of protein, activation to mTOR, highly acidic. It's just stupid, all right? Mercury is a real common cause of dementia, eating the mercury in fish. That's why I call the Mediterranean diet the Antichrist diet, because it pretends it's going to offer people salvation and help them, but it makes them fat, sick, and stupid. Ansel Keys had figured out and shown pretty well back in the 1950s that saturated fat was very atherogenic, and that led to a push for the PUFAs, okay, the omega-6 cooking oils. PUFA is polyunsaturated fatty acids, okay, and they're just as bad as saturated fat. They're toxic to the gut lining. They do things in a little bit different way, but they're a disaster for health, okay. And so here I show a picture of a conventional medical center, okay, a big fancy building. Typically it's shaped like a box. And, I hate modern architecture. It sucks. It's dehumanizing. And, Tom Wolfe, the great writer, he wrote that basically modern architecture, you always have a building that looks like an animal cage with a statue of a turd in front. I don't know if he called it animal cages, but he said there's always a statue of a turd in front of modern buildings, okay? And so we're going to, call things what they are in this book. And when I speak, modern art sucks. It's a fake. It's a psyop. It's a way to degrade your history. It's a way to degrade civilization, okay? You go to a modern art museum like in Rotterdam or something, and they've got statues of turds, okay? What an insult that is. Okay, so what I'm saying is when somebody puts a statue of a turd in front of a building, that person is not your friend. They are insulting you. They are making a joke of you. Here, you stupid prole. Why don't you take a sniff of this statue, okay? You should not like that. You should resent that. what I've kind of seen when I read a lot of history is that Americans are basically becoming feminized, wimpified sissies. They don't complain about stuff. This would be an insult. Can you imagine if you put this in front of people in 1800? They would be pissed off, okay? You're going to put a statue of a turd in front of our hospital? You know, get that out of here. They would not accept it. They weren't wimps like people are nowadays. Okay, they didn't drink F- water and make them stupid and docile. Okay, and also the point I'm making here is a little tiny vegan clinic like Kempner's Rice Houses gets far better results than, and this is kind of funny, the big fancy hospital. You could give a big fancy hospital all the equipment in the world. Give them $1 billion budget, okay? Let them have all the stents, all the operating rooms, all the MRIs, all the CAT scans, all the colonoscopy that they could want. And then you could take some little, tiny little clinic here where they just taught patient the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet. These patients would have 100 times better outcomes, okay? It's just a fact, okay? And, you know, people don't like that. Somebody who's done, you know, big fancy training and all this fancy stuff, they don't like that. But also, I tell, you know, medical students or medical doctors when they hang around me, I tell them, look, here's the good news and the bad news. The bad news is you don't know anything. The good news is I can teach you more in a couple of hours than you've learned in the last 10 years. But then the good news is you'll know what causes these diseases and how to cure them. But then here's what happens. The patients will refuse. And 95% of patients will refuse dietary advice. So you end up, and then you can't get paid for it. And you could potentially get sued if you don't recommend a pill. You're not following standard of care. So you can really only apply. This is really for a select audience, all this low-fat vegan diet way to help people heal. You know, it's not available to the masses, and it couldn't be available to the masses unless the structure of society was changed, and I don't see that happening in this way, a good way, anytime soon. All right, so here's Martin Luther. In 1517, he nailed his 95 Theses to the wall of the church in Wittenberg, and this is considered the starting event of the Reformation. Okay, and Luther was a bit of a hothead, a bit of a crazy guy. He was also a genius. He was a brilliant guy and a brilliant scholar. Here's some quotes by Luther, and we'll parody those a little too. Luther said, "A simple layman with Scripture is superior to the Pope and his councils without Scripture." And so what I would say, an illiterate peasant with the starch vegan diet is healthier than an Ivy League doctor with a Mediterranean diet. And you could easily make it to a health coach with no previous training in medicine, but they've learned this low-fat vegan stuff and the stuff related to it. They know more than a doctor about how to cure a patient, because most diseases related to what I would call the NET: nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. Those three subjects: nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. That's where you focus your time, and you'll be able to help tremendous amount of people if they're willing to go with it. But at least you've got a chance, okay? With this other stuff, they say it. They call those diseases chronic, all these common diseases chronic, because they never cure them. Zero cure rate, okay? Like, what kind of a sports team would brag about always losing, okay? If you have any sports team, everyone wants to win: the coach, the team, the players, the athletes. But with allopathic medicine and chronic disease, they go, we can never win. No one ever wins. We always lose. We always fail. We're the best. You know, no, that's stupid. It's ridiculous. Martin Luther also said, "If I am shown my error, I will be the first to throw my books into the fire. I do not accept the authority of popes and councils, for they have contradicted each other. My conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen." Okay? Sometimes I can go put it all the way up to the front, and then when I come away, then maybe it refocuses. Okay, so I got it to refocus by doing that. All right, so here I'm just going to parody that quote. "If I am shown my error, then I will be the first to throw my books into the fire. I do not accept the authority of phony experts on the internet and Ivy League hospitals, for they have contradicted epidemiology, nutrition, and common sense. My conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen." Let the vegan reformation begin. Okay, a little bit of caveats, a little nuance here. By the way, I am a Catholic. I'm not Protestant. Okay, I do think there's a dime's bit of difference between the things they believe, the important stuff they all believe. You know, be nice to each other, follow the Ten Commandments, you know, love thy neighbor, trying to help each other, all that stuff. But all right. But anyways, I do think Catholic's a lot better than Protestant. Our churches are better. We enjoy art. There's what I would call an aesthetic quality to Catholicism that Protestant lacks. Protestantism is bleak. Their churches suck. You go inside, there's no paintings, no sculpture. Okay, you go inside a Catholic church, it's beautiful. The old Catholic churches or the cathedrals or something, all these magnificent statues and paintings and stained glass window. It's all elegant and it all goes together. You know, even if the preacher is a low IQ, homosexual, alcoholic, pedophile, scumbag piece of crap, and I don't really like going to the church because I think most of the priests suck. But I still think you need the church, and I wish the church would reform, but it could never be good unless it was allowed married men. Until they allow married men, the church is always going to stink, in my opinion. The Catholic Church is never going to redevelop itself, and I don't know. I don't think it ever will because they've kind of got like a stranglehold on it. But be that as it may, I think the only thing that could save America is that we return to Christian ethics like this country had. It was founded on Christianity. Because without that, atheistic Darwinism is going to control everything. And atheistic Darwinism basically wants to shrink the population. It wants eugenics. This is actually in writing decades ago. They want to drop the population down to 500 million, okay? And right now there's about 8.5 billion. So what that means is they want 9 out of 5 people gone, okay? And they're going to push for that one way or another. And that's not good. Okay, Catholicism encourages pilgrimages, appreciation of the saints and the Virgin Mary. Like I said, Protestantism is bleak in comparison, as noted by Carl Jung. Catholics have more appreciation of other cultures. Catholicism has much in common with Aristotle, St. Aquinas, scholasticism. So Aristotle, all the Greek philosophy and the open-minded objective scholarship. Aquinas, the synergy of putting things together. And what I meant by these priests nowadays, how is some guy who's never had a girlfriend, who's never had a wife, who's never raised children, who's never, as an adult, worked in the real work world, how's he going to give me advice, okay? I think a priest should be a married guy who's worked a little bit in the real world first and has some real life experience, and he'll be a lot more skilled at giving advice and combine that with his, religious education, okay? The way they've got it now, that's why, take a look at Catholic authors. The great Catholic authors, none of them are priests. Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens, Fyodor Dostoevsky. How come there's like no priest that can write a book worth of crap? Because they don't have much of a pool to pick from. Back when families were big and typical family had 10 children, and everyone was poor. It wasn't a big deal to send one of your sons to become a priest, okay? But nowadays, when you only got 1.5 kids, you want your kid giving you some grandchildren. You don't want to send them off to the priest. So who ends up going to the priest? It ends up kind of being a boys' club, okay? And it's not good Christianity, okay? It's weak. All right, what else? Protestantism was more influenced by Plato, St. Augustine, and Luther, okay? And so they overemphasize Bible, 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 which I think, and they think that makes them better than Catholics, but it's stupid because the Catholics are in connection to Jesus, and the Catholics also, they didn't even officially settle on what the Bible contained until a couple hundred years after Christ died, about 300 years after Christ died, okay? So give me a break. And Plato and Augustine, they're kind of austere. They're not a lot of fun. A lot of stuff in Catholicism is fun. Aesthetically, it's best. So I would say even and this preacher, Robert Barron or something, he's a bishop like in Los Angeles or something. He's actually a pretty bright guy. He says some silly things, but he's pretty bright. He talked about how the beauty of it draws you towards it, okay? And then as you enjoy all the aesthetically beautiful things, you start to see a lot of good comes from it too. And whether or not, whatever you think about the dogma, that's another issue, okay? But I agree with that aesthetic component is very valuable and enjoyable and nice. Okay, let's see. And the Protestants, did do a lot of great things. I mean, Johann Sebastian Bach came out of that. Luther himself was a good musician, even wrote a great hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. And then Lutheranism was very strong on encouraging music. But Protestant in generalism was iconoclast. Icono meaning pictures and sculptures, and they would break them and remove them from the churches, whereas Catholicism has always been very pro-art and sculpture. Okay, in the 1800s, the Catholic Renaissance in England did lead to a lot of great art by the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, John Everett Millais, etc. And they made magnificent art. And then they had lots and lots of students. One of them, for example, Edmund Layton, was just a magnificent artist, often of chivalry type stuff. Protestantism tends to get taken over by the ruler of the country, e.g., like England, and get degraded. To me, that's a joke. Henry VIII, being in charge of a religion. Yeah, he's real nice with his wives. So that's why Protestantism tends to go into the ground, is that it typically gets taken over by the ruler and it ends up becoming a joke, like it has become in England. The Anglican Church is a joke, okay? The ordinary person, especially in the villages, knows absolutely nothing. They live like simple cattle or irrational pigs, okay? So it's always going to be the case that, most people are illiterate and are not interested in knowing anything. That's just human nature, but I actually think that's one of the good things about Catholicism. Everybody can join. Anybody who wants to be a Catholic, you can be a Catholic. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you are or where you're from. Everyone is welcome. And there's something for everyone to do. So there's a lot of other groups where you can't be a member unless you get someone to allow you and they don't want you. So what I'm saying is the most inclusive, the most tolerant thing there is Catholicism. All you have to do is say, oh, Jesus is my Savior, I believe in Jesus, and you're a Christian, okay? You don't have to join any formal church. You can still be a Christian and be other things too. They're not exclusive. All right, Jacques Berson had a good quote. He said, for Protestantism, Luther is like Marx and Calvin is like Lenin. Yeah, they're sort of very absolutist, and they're kind of brutal in a lot of ways. Bertrand Russell had a good quote here. He said, Erasmus timidly defended the Roman Catholic Church, while Luther savagely attacked it. And I think the big difference was Luther had the protection of the princes, like Frederick the Wise and stuff. So he could say and do a lot of stuff as long as he was speaking from his home territory where he was protected around Wittenberg, okay? But, Erasmus was a little bit more in different locations and stuff. And Erasmus didn't want to see the church destroyed, okay? And I think I have a lot more in common with Erasmus and Luther. Luther's entertaining. Erasmus was, he was nice. He wanted to keep the church together, even though he loved to make fun of it, because he wrote a book called In Praise of Folly. He was more of a scholar than a reformer. And I would agree with the idea that the Christians, have more in common and agree about the important things like, Jesus Christo and the saints as role models, and be nice to each other, be a source of light and goodness in the world. That's a billion times more important than the petty things they disagree about. Okay, a couple quick Erasmus quotes. Eagles do not chase flies, so don't waste your time on petty stuff. To interweave aphorisms is to make language sparkle with the gems from antiquity. Your library is your paradise. Erasmus then says, by labeling the new learning as heresy, they make orthodoxy synonymous with ignorance. And that's how the modern world is, okay? That's what atheism does too. It basically says you either agree with us, the party's always right, or you are disinformation or some BS like that. Okay, let's see, what's this now? Luther was an Augustinian and he wanted to diminish Aristotle's influence on Christianity. Yeah, also Luther hated Aristotle. Aristotle's like one of the top 3 smartest people who ever lived, and he led to good things. Aristotle leads to good. There's a very good reason why Ayn Rand loved him. I love him too. He basically says be objective, be fair, be nice, be honest, and all this other stuff. He was great. He summarized all the knowledge of the ancient Greek world and made it accessible to other people. Okay, this is Will Durant talking. Will Durant was a pretty good historian. There's a few little minor things I'll disagree on him. I read a bunch of his books, but overall he's pretty good. He says Luther is the most vituperative writer who ever lived. Luther is the most forceful German writer who ever lived. Luther's theology was medieval. Luther removed much of what was good in Christianity. Luther left no stone unturned. Luther paved the way for Calvin. Luther's nationalism closely linked him to Germany, but Calvin had more of an international influence, and Calvin structured the doctrines of Protestantism. Yeah, and Calvin was a crazy guy too. Anyways, Durant and Nietzsche both agree. Luther killed the Renaissance, okay? Luther's Reformation was psh, and that's what I would say too. Okay, yeah, so they gave a lot of money to the church for indulgences. That money helped paint the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. It helped Raphael to paint the Stanza Signatura, the signature room with, the School of Athens, the Communion Disputa, the Poets of Parnassus, and all these other great, awesome, some of the greatest paintings in the history of the world. Okay, the 5 or 6 blind men and an elephant. It's a good way to look at learning. Basically, you want to come up above and have a bird's eye view. I actually should have put that painting in here by Caspar David Friedrich, the one looking out on a sea fog, where he's got his back to the audience as he's standing up on a mountaintop looking over the mist. And that's called a Rückenfolger, where a guy basically has his back to you, because then you sort of feel like you're in the character. Beautiful painting. Anyway, so the point of the 5 blind men and the elephant is that each of the PhDs tends to see a very narrow part of what's going on. The biochemistry mechanisms is one of them. Research on humans is, another one's part of it. Comparative anatomy could be part of it. So the one feeling the tail of the elephant thinks it's, a rope. The one feeling the side of the elephant thinks it's a wall. The one feeling the tusk thinks it's a spear. The one feeling the ear thinks it's a rug. Okay, so the point is, if you want to be really good at a subject, you got to study it from all different points of view. And then you have a bird's eye view, so to speak, looking down. You can see the whole big picture. This is a great metaphor. I think it comes from India, the 5 or 6 blind men and the elephant. It's really useful. Aristotle said the first step in an intelligent conversation is to remove emotions. Yeah, if a person can't be objective, and most people really can't, they can never go anywhere. And a lot of people take everything personally. You start talking about obesity or lipids, they're like, are you calling me fat? And it's like, oh God, so you can't have a conversation with them. But that's also why, sad to say it, but most people have no chance of getting better. Like I said, I've been a doctor 30 years, and I can tell you, most patients don't get better. Most patients have chronic diseases, and they just go down the tubes. It's a rare individual that can say, hey, I screwed up, it's my fault, now I know better, and I'm going to turn things around. That's rare. Let's see. Here's some people: Ruth Heidrich, Janet Marie Wakelin, Chris Wark, Lorraine. They all survived metastatic cancer for decades. Okay, and what do they typically do? Go low fat, low sodium vegan. There's a few exceptions. Chris Wark, I really like him. He's done a lot of good things, but I think he allows people to have olive oil. I think that's a mistake, and he maybe got away with it, but I don't think other people might be so lucky. Some of them exercise like crazy. Ruth Heidrich runs triathlons. Janet Murray Wakelin, she's a lady who wrote the book Raw Cures Cancer, and she, ran a marathon every day for a year all around Australia. Ruth Heidrich, she's great. I have an interview with her on this YouTube channel if you want to watch that. She's real famous for living like over 40 years with metastatic breast cancer. She's still alive. She's super nice. Really bright lady too. Let's see. And this lady right here, she's a brilliant lady, and she did a lot of good things. She wrote a book, I'm Not Afraid of Cancer Anymore. It's a great book. Okay, she talks about God's way of healing. It's all good. Okay, the longest lived populations in the world are all religious. Religious comes from the word legati. Legati is to ligate, to tie together. So religious, what it means is to tie together the population, to unify the population. And, when you hear, diversity is our strength, really, I think what you're hearing is that the powers that be are laughing at you. What they want is you divided. They want all the families divorced. They want all the people squabbling about their gender, squabbling about their religion or their ethnic group or whatever group or institution they're in. The more they're all divided and weak and a-religious too, the easier they are to control. A bunch of slaves, okay? Because when I grew up, you would say the Pledge of Allegiance, under one nation under God. We are proud of being religious under God, unlike what we saw as the despicable, Russian commies, godless commies, and we used to make fun of them, and they're real poor, and their country sucks, okay? Whereas now our country is becoming godless and poor and, messed up, okay? We used to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we used to also say, the coin was e pluribus unum, out of many one. We become one people, Americans, Teddy Roosevelt said, no hyphenated Americans. We are all Americans, just Americans. You don't have to call yourself, Should I call myself I'm an Irish Puerto Rican American? No, I'm an American, okay? And people, it was much better. I came back up in the old days. Nowadays, we're all being feminized. I think we're basically being groomed for slavery, okay? You turn on the TV in the 1980s, there's all these macho men, Charlton Heston, Charles Bronson, Mel Gibson, Chuck Connors, Rocky Balboa, Sylvester Stallone, and he's, Clubber Lang, Mr. T, Apollo Creed. There's one macho man after another. That was America, okay? We were proud of it, and the comedians were really funny, and they joke about anything. Nowadays, everything is feminized. Who's the male role model on TV nowadays? Homer Simpson, fat and stupid. Okay, so anyways, a tyrant wants to get rid of religion because it makes people weak when they lose their religion. You can't unify a society, a people. Cortisol suppresses the immune system. Psychological stress, sleep deprivation, caffeine cause increased cortisol. These are all things that weaken a person's health. Okay, a lot of low IQ modern people think psychology. Oh, that's another thing too. People have like this idea of science as a religion and they think it's real. They don't understand stuff like psychology is really pretty much of a joke. Don't get me wrong. There's some very nice people going to psychology, and there are some people in psychology who do a good job. But there's a lot of phonies in psychology, okay? There's a lot of famous psychologists telling everybody to eat a carnivore diet, which is nonsense, okay? Um, and what I'm trying to say is the psychology of Christianity is much better than the psychology of psychology. How can a psychologist give you advice about relationships when they can't tell you the difference between a man and a woman? They're part of the modern sort of commie establishment, and they basically will do whatever they're told. Okay, if they're told they have to, put a bunch of pronouns after their name, they will do it. Okay, if they're told, whatever they're told, they just go with it. They don't have any fixed moral foundation, and that's a big advantage Christianity says. If you tell a psychologist, who are my role models? They can't answer that. You tell them, what is it to be good? What is it to lead a good life? They can't answer that. Christianity can easily answer this. It'll be like Christ marrying the saints. Easy, okay? And if you ask a Christian, what is good art? They can easily tell you. Paintings and sculpture, Michelangelo, Raphael, Caravaggio, Millet, Leighton, Freeburg, etc., on and on and on. Psychologists can't answer that, okay? If you ask a Christian, what is great literature? They can easily tell you. Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol, Victor Hugo, Les Mis, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov, Henry Sienkiewicz, Quo Vadis, okay? Psychology can't answer that question. So that's what I mean by when you get past the superficial BS, it's kind of a big joke, all right? What's great architecture? Psychologists will tell you they don't know. Christianity will say, look at the cathedrals. It's obvious, okay? What's great music? Christian music, okay? Psychology can't answer that. It's obvious. I can easily rattle off 100 masterpieces of Christian music. Masterpieces. Not even great. Masterpieces, okay? If you ask a Christian the meaning of life, they can easily tell you the question. Love Christ and help other people, okay? Take up your cross and do the best you can on this earth. Be a source of goodness, be on the side of goodness, all right? Psychology is so tolerant it can't judge anything. Their brain is so open-minded that their brain has fallen out, okay? And whatever fad comes along, they will use it even if it means hurting people, okay? They're notorious for breaking apart families. I know guy after guy who said the psychologist promoted them to get divorced. And then they funnel patients to psychiatrists who give them drugs that are a chemical lobotomy. So it's not benign. All right, Christians make things more joyful. They're the light of the world. Look, winter is a bleak, cold season. And what happens? Christmas makes it the best time of the whole year, okay? The Christmas lights are beautiful. Psychology says that man has no soul. He's just a talking monkey, a talking primate, atheistic Darwinism. So to them, there is no Christmas vacation. There's just winter break. There is no Easter vacation. There's just spring break, okay? And dehumanize things, okay? The Bible tradition promotes morality among people. It's pro-family, pro-honesty, pro-generosity. What they're trying to do now, the latest push is to get rid of the family, to say there's no such thing as a mother and father, that any two people who are dating, whether they're a husband and wife, man and woman, or if they're the same sex, they're all the same thing. But they're not, okay? The mother and the father genetically are involved in that child, and that's the standard family. Yeah, I realize there's tons of variants of it, but that's the standard family, and it's always been since the beginning of recorded time, and that's best for kids, okay? They want to make it so, eventually you'll have a hatchery, like in the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and the children aren't even owned by the parents. They're owned by the state, and they can do whatever they want with them, okay? They're legalizing pedophilia. They want the age of consent lower and lower, 12 or younger, so they can take your kids away and do what they want with them, all right? Christian colors are white for faith, green for hope, red for love, okay? It's a noble thing, all right? Let's see. And then here's a little St. Paul quote. The idea of love is real important in Christianity. It makes everything work. And Christianity is honest about that, okay? Why do parents do the best with a kid? Because they love the kid. The mother and the father are the best people for a kid, and they have them, both of them. Okay, a quick quote from Corinthians, and then that'll be, I think, the close of this chapter. And the real main point in this chapter was those two charts on diets, and then I just kind of rambled on a little bit about this other stuff. But I'll still read off this quick little excerpt from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and can fathom all mysteries, and have the faith to move mountains, if I have not love, then I am nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Okay, so, and also people might be saying to themselves, why do I talk about this religious stuff? Why do I talk about love? They just want to talk about medicine, about science. And a point that I'm trying to make, if you haven't figured it out by now, is that you can't have medicine and science and good health without this stuff. Because the current system hates the patients, and that's why it poisons them and does more harm than good. And until it starts to love the patients and have these biblical ethics about man creating the image of God, intrinsically good, like Ayn Rand had said, the most important minority, the smallest minority minority as the individual. Until you have those ethics, it'll never be good. It'll always go for the money, and the money is always going to be 100 times better to rip them off and poison them and cut them up with some bogus surgery, okay? That's how it's going to be. That's how it is, and that's why the purpose of learning from this book is to become smart so you don't get chumped into unnecessary drugs and surgery that you don't need that can mess up your life. Okay, that's it for this chapter.